Well, hello again, everyone. If we're to talk about expressions of Scottish identity, then we must talk about Robert Burns, who many regard as the authentic voice of the Scottish people. And I have to say that, like Robert Burns, our next speaker, Alan Beck, is no slouch in the expression of Scottish identity department. As an accomplished singer and a member of Caledon, Scotland's three tenors, Alan has sung for Scotland all over the world, including several times right here in Chicago. And it was twice upon one of those times at our St. Andrew's Day gala that two of the most unique moments of my time as president of the Chicago Scots happened. The first came when Alan, Jamie, Ivan, and Michael, collectively known as Caledon, closed out the first part of their performance. And they worked out a special version of the blues tune, Sweet Home Chicago. They modified the refrain, come on, baby, don't you want to go back to the land called California, to my sweet home Chicago, into, come on, baby, don't you want to go back to the land called Caledonia from my sweet home Chicago. And then they invited me up on stage to play along with them. That was a real and a rare treat. Now, the second unique moment came very quickly on the heels of the first, following a costume change so swift that Diana Ross would have been proud. Alan and the lads reappeared in some very snazzy kilt outfits. Think Las Vegas era Elvis Presley. And they sang a beautiful medley of Scottish pop tunes. Alan made his way over to our table, knelt on the ground, and as he sang a very tender version of Rod Stewart's I Don't Want to Talk About It, he invited my wife Aisha to sit upon his knee, and it was a very humorous and human and heartfelt moment. Aisha and I loved it, and so did everyone in the room. A couple of moments later, the medley moved on, and Alan sang another Rod Stewart song, Do You Think I'm Sexy? Fortunately, Aisha was no longer sitting on Alan's knee at the time, but unfortunately, Alan was sitting on mine at the time. It was a brilliant performance full of joy and pride and passion and tongue-in-cheek irreverence and fun that comes with an expression of Scottish identity. But Alan is not here to talk about any of that. He's here in his capacity as Senior Vice President of the Robert Burns World Federation to talk about the Federation and its mission to promote, educate, and celebrate the life and work of Robert Burns and Scotland's heritage, language, and culture. The Chicago Scots are a member organization of the Robert Burns World Federation, and I am incredibly impressed and inspired by the excellent information I received from them. And I encourage you to join either as an individual or an organization. Alan has always been a great admirer of Burns and has delivered the immortal memory numerous times every year since 2005, including right here in Chicago, which was one of the best I've ever heard. He's been singing Burns tunes for 45 years, and as he himself says, he cannot recall the number or count the number of events where he's performed the Bard songs. As president of the Greenock Burns Club, Alan launched a campaign to have a statue of Burns erected in Greenock and commissioned Her Majesty's sculptor in Ordinary in Scotland to create a maquette of his vision. Friends, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the Scottish North American Community Conference my friend Alan Beck.
Gus, thank you very much for that incredibly impressive introduction, actually. Impressive because your memory is far better than mine. But I do have very happy memories of Chicago and singing for the Chicago Scots. I have a PowerPoint presentation for you. And so, with your permission, I'm going to share my screen, which I shall do right now. And we will get on with this. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot for old lang syne? So this presentation is basically entitled, what does it mean to be Scottish? What does it actually mean, that song, when you hear that song by Robert Burns, Auld Lang Syne? It means many things, I suppose, to many people. And I think that, as Donald McLaren said, trying to identify what it means to be Scottish, there are so many things, and it does mean different things to different people. That's, of course, one of the most famous songs in the world. It might mean to you, Robert Burns, it might mean brotherhood, sisterhood, fraternity. It might mean your family. It could mean memories of your mother and father singing songs together about Scotland. I think for me, it probably means all of the above, and probably for a lot of people watching this presentation, it probably means the same. Robert Burns for me actually means many different things as well. Currently, that's what it means to me at the minute. As Gus said, I started a campaign in Greenock, which is one of the very few Scottish towns without a statue of Robert Burns. Surprising, since it is the home of the world's first and oldest Burns Club, the Greenock Burns Club, the Mother Club, formed in 1801, just 5 short years after the poet's untimely death. I commissioned that maquette, and it's a magnificent maquette from Her Majesty's Sculptor and Ordinary, Professor Alexander Stoddart. And we'll be starting a campaign to raise the funds for that statue, because it will be fantastic. Should old acquaintance be forgot? I've put a question mark there, but in fact, it's not a question in Burns' particular song. It really is saying, if we were to let our memory of our friends fade, then here's things that we could do. Because Burns doesn't want friendship to be forgotten. He doesn't want our roots to be forgotten. And perhaps that is more difficult, to remember your Scottish roots if you live outside of Scotland. Although, as Camilla said just a few minutes ago, the Scots who live outside of Scotland are often more Scottish than we Scots who live inside. So what does it mean to be Scottish? Well, some people may think of great Scottish heroes like Sir Walter Scott, the inventor of the historical novel, Robert Louis Stevenson, the author of Kidnapped, Treasure Island, Jekyll and Hyde, or Dr. David Livingstone, the great African explorer, missionary, and humanitarian. Or perhaps John Loudon McAdam, the man who invented the tarmac that we drive our Fords and our Chryslers on today. Thinking about being Scottish, you could be thinking about heroes like perhaps the world's greatest ever philanthropist, Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in the world, who gave up his fortune to build libraries and other educational institutions to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor in educational terms. You might also think of great Scottish inventors like the father of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, and the father of television, John Logie Baird. Perhaps you might think about this chap here, Sir Alexander Fleming, the man who discovered penicillin and who is therefore responsible, more than any other human being ever to exist on this planet, for saving more lives. But I should suspect that for some people, perhaps that man there might be the one who identifies as a Scot, Sir Sean Connery. These are all great Scottish heroes, but I would suggest that for a lot of people who are American Scots, for them, what it means to be Scottish might be more this type of person. It might be more the parents, the grandparents, the great-grandparents who emigrated from Scotland across the Atlantic, probably actually from Greenock, where I currently am just now, to find a better life for themselves. We're sailing west to prairie lands, sun-kissed and blessed, the Crofters' Trail to Happiness. I'm going to introduce you to a Scot, someone who I think is actually a great Scot, and someone who I think makes being Scottish really interesting, and someone who perhaps you have never even heard of. He's called Colin Ray Brown. He was born on the 19th of December, 1821 in Greenock. And for the people amongst you who are good at math, you will probably realize that in a week's time, that will be 200 years ago to the actual exact date. That's a painting of Greenock from 1811. I don't think Greenock had changed much in the 10 years between that painting and the birth of Colin Ray Brown. Of course, it has changed quite a bit now. And as I said before, very possibly for a lot of people who are on this presentation just now, that will be the place where your ancestors last touched Scottish soil, because the boats travelled across the Atlantic from those docks which you see in the distance there. So Colin Ray Brown, why is he important? He's important for many, many reasons, and he's absolutely central to this talk about why or what it means to be Scottish. On a personal level, as a past president of Greenock Burns Club, he was a past president of Greenock Burns Club. But he was also the main author, the man with the idea and the big organizer of the Burns Centenary in 1859. He was the man who came up with the idea and raised the money for the Wallace Monument. He founded the London Burns Club. He was hugely influential in the statue of Burns in Glasgow's George Square. He raised a large amount of money in London when he moved down there to complete the Scott Monument in Edinburgh. He was the man who got the statue of Burns built on Thames Embankment in London. He was the man who got the bust of Burns placed in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey. But perhaps the most important things that he did were to co-found the Robert Burns World Federation and to be the person who proposed and who drove through the first publication of the Burns Chronicle. The Burns Chronicle is probably the greatest example of Burns knowledge and Burns scholarship that we have in the world. He was also the person who got the Highland Mary statue at Dunoon. And his interest in Robert Burns came about in 1842 on the 25th of January, the poet's birthday, when he attended the foundation stone laying of Highland Mary. And this event really, really inspired Colin Ray Brown to become what he termed a sincere disciple of Robert Burns. He attended the very first national demonstration of Burns, which took place in 1844. He was a very young man when he went to that, but it clearly had a big effect on him. This idea of people getting together to express their admiration for Scottish culture had a huge influence on Colin Ray Brown, to the extent that that particular structure, which you see there, and of course you will recognize as the Wallace Monument. The idea of having a monument to a great Scottish hero like Wallace came from Colin Ray Brown, He never really got the credit for it, but it did in fact come from him, and it came from him through his newspaper contacts. He wrote many articles basically promulgating this idea to have a national monument built for Wallace. And it was the first of many monuments that he was involved in, many memorializations that he was involved in for great Scottish heroes. In January 1858, he was at the Brigadoon in Ayr, and he suddenly realized that in a year's time, it would be the Burns centenary, 100 years since the birth of the poet. Connery Brown, with that amazing ability which the Victorians had, that amazing confidence that yes, we can do it. He set about organising a worldwide festival. This is at a time where there were barely telegraphs. A worldwide festival. He wrote to every town, city, club or association, both at home and abroad, as he said, who sincerely adopt as their creed, a man's a man for all that. At that particular celebration that year, there were over 1,200 separate events in honour of Robert Burns which took place. They were all over the United States. They were all over the Empire, and also in France, Switzerland, and Denmark. This was long before television, long before telephones, long before the internet. It was basically writing letters to people, trying to organize things all over the world. It takes an incredible confidence and an incredible amount of enthusiasm and energy to do that. That celebration was described as a spectacle unprecedented in the history of the world, and the festival brought a national and international distinction to Scotland. But what it really did was it started to unite Scottish clubs, societies, and organisations worldwide. He felt that statue building was really the way to memorialise poets and great heroes, monument building. And in fact, that statue in George Square in Glasgow is an amazing statue, not because it's the greatest Burns statue ever, but because of Colin Ray Brown's idea of bringing working class people into being involved in the memorialisation project. Previously, statues were generally built from large donations by wealthy individuals. But Colin Ray Brown, through his newspapers, he proposed the idea of all the working classes in Scotland getting involved by paying a shilling subscription. And in fact, that shilling subscription turned out to be by far the largest amount of money which built that statue in George Square. In fact, for the opening, the unveiling of that statue in George Square, there were 100,000 of the working classes turned up because they felt ownership. They felt that they were part of a Scottish cultural event. He moved to London, Colin Ray Brown. He formed the London Burns Club, and he persuaded a very wealthy Glasgow businessman who was London-based, called John Gordon Crawford, to join that club. No sooner had he joined than he twisted his arm and asked him to pay for a statue of Burns in London, which was unveiled in 1884. That statue by Sir John Steele, Her Majesty's sculptor in ordinary at the time, is actually the most copied Burns statue in the world. Those of you who are in New York will recognize it. There it is in Central Park. If there's anyone in Dundee, in the north east coast of Scotland, then you'll recognize it as your own Burns statue. And if you're in Dunedin, in New Zealand, you will recognize that that is the same statue of Burns in Dunedin. That idea that Colin Ray Brown had for the shilling subscription for the statue in George Square, he then took to the idea of having a bust of Robert Burns placed into the National Church, the very centre of the empire, Westminster Abbey. Westminster Abbey had a Poets' Corner, and right in the centre of that Poets' Corner was, of course, William Shakespeare. Colin Ray Brown decided that really to be an equal part of the Union at a time where there was no hint, there was no desire, there was no need for Scottish political independence. Scotland was part of the world's greatest empire at the time, and so in order to be an equal part of that, the idea of what they called Unionist nationalists was that these cultural events would be as important to show Scotland's place in the empire as they would be to show England's. And in fact, he was responsible, again, for having the bust of Robert Burns placed right at the centre of the British Empire, the actual beating heart of the empire. Robert Burns, a man who wrote in Scots, sits right next to the greatest English writer, William Shakespeare. And that's hugely significant in a Scottish cultural context. It was after the unveiling of that Colin Ray Brown was walking from Westminster Abbey to the statue of Burns on the embankment with two gentlemen from the Kilmarnock Burns Club, Captain David Snedden and David Mackay. They were talking about the 1886 forthcoming anniversary of Burns' first edition, the Kilmarnock edition, poems chiefly in the Scottish dialect. And the conversation turned at that point to a federation of Scottish clubs and societies based around a love for Robert Burns, but really to bring together disparate Scots from around the world into one organisation. That picture that you see there is actually the former George Hotel, and that is where the Robert Burns World Federation first had a meeting. And in the chair for that meeting was Colin Ray Brown. He wanted that organisation to bring together clubs, societies, or anyone who had a love of Scotland and Scottish culture. In fact, if there's anyone who could tell what it meant to be Scottish, then they should be joining that particular organisation. That is what Brown thought. And that picture there is actually, I took that picture a few weeks ago. It's on the wall at Greenock Burns Club. That was presented to Greenock Burns Club on the 21st of April the 30th of April in 1886. And that is their federation charter. The last great thing that Brown did was that book which you see in front of you. That was the Burns Chronicle. The Burns Chronicle is still published to this very day. It is an amazing resource of not just Burns literature, but Scots literature and culture in general. It's an incredibly interesting book. There have been many, many PhDs about Robert Burns and Scottish literature which have been written using that book as a main resource. It was wholly devoted to the interests of Burns students, being the official organ of the Burns Federation, Burns clubs, and Scottish societies throughout the world. So why am I telling you all of this? That picture there, by the way, is the unveiling of Highland Mary's statue at Dunoon, which Brown was deeply involved in. And in fact, it was the last thing that he was involved in before he passed away. But the reason I'm telling you all this is because the idea of what it is to be Scottish, it means so many different things to us, and it is extremely difficult to pin down. But what is absolutely clear is that people want to express their Scottishness. And it's the very idea which Colin Ray Brown had of wanting to celebrate, wanting to see what happened in the past, but move forward with it now in a Scottish context, which really actually is what it means to be Scottish. It doesn't really matter where you're born. It doesn't really matter what your ancestry is. The thing that matters is, do you love Scotland? Do you have a love for Scotland? And do you want Scotland and Scottish culture to continue and to progress? Certainly at the Robert Burns World Federation, we do. We're extremely proud to be working now with the American Scottish Foundation as a directed giving project. The Federation it launched this particular relationship on the anniversary of Burns' first supper at his birthplace in Alloway. We look to expand our work, our desires, our ethos all over the world. We have currently 204 clubs. We have clubs in North America, Canada, the US. We have clubs in Argentina. We have obviously clubs in Australia, New Zealand, in Fiji, in Hong Kong, Singapore, anywhere really that Scots moved to, that Scots emigrated to, that Scots wanted to take their culture to. There is a real heritage footprint which comes from Robert Burns. He's worth £203 million per annum to the Scottish economy. And it's incredibly important for Scotland that we are still giving out the message of Robert Burns. The Federation is regarded as one of Scotland's most distinguished national and international organisations. It encourages and arranges competitions, both spoken word and music, especially amongst children. It stimulates and develops the study and the teaching of Scottish literature, art, music and language, not just through Burns, but through other great Scots writers like Scott, Stevenson and John Galt. It seeks to strengthen the bond of fellowship amongst members of Burns clubs and kindred Scottish societies by encouraging them to honour the memory of Robert Burns' life and works. And I don't have to tell you that it is successful in that way. Probably you know about the recent survey from Glasgow University by Dr. Paul McGratty from the Centre of Robert Burns Studies, which showed that there are between 5 and 10 million people every year who attend a Burns supper in the world. I don't know how many of you have ever been to a Shakespeare supper. I've certainly never been, and I love Shakespeare. I would go if I knew there were any. But it's incredible the fact that the Scottish nationhood has really been placed upon the shoulders of that figure of Robert Burns all over the world. Apart from that, the Federation conserves and it supports places associated with Burns like the Cottage, the Birthplace Museum, Ellisland, the House in Dumfries, and countless statues and monuments throughout the world. Our schools competitions see thousands of children every year taking part and learning the works of Burns, learning the Scots language, learning Scottish culture to a great extent. The relationship with the American Scottish Foundation is something which we believe is going to strengthen the bonds of fellowship in Scottish cultural societies through Robert Burns. And there are details on our website and the American Scottish Foundation website of how to become a member of the Robert Burns World Federation to help the ethos and to help push forward Scottish culture through Burns. So, what have we done recently? Well, we had a really wonderful conference in September in Paisley, where a personal and posthumous coat of arms of Robert Burns was presented by the Queen's Lord Lion. Robert Burns, for those of you who don't know, was a very keen amateur heraldist. And he was very, very interested in having a coat of arms for himself created by the Lord Lion. Unfortunately, he passed away without having seen that through. He didn't really have the money, to be honest, to do it. And it has always been a bugbear for me to know that Burns wanted one and he never got one. We spoke to the Lord Lion, who is a very keen Burnsian himself and who proposes a mortal memory countless times a year. The Lord Lion actually said, I've been waiting for the Federation to do this. It was a wonderful occasion when we were presented with the arms of Burns, and I'm going to show you a little bit about that in a moment. We're inaugurating this year a North American writing competition for the year of the Scottish stories, the written word. We have opened in our headquarters in Kilmarnock in Ayrshire a new Scots language learning unit. And on top of this, the schools competition, as I said before, sees thousands of school pupils understanding, memorising and performing the works of Burns and other Scottish authors. In fact, during COVID, the work of the Federation was recognised by no less a person than the Duke of Rothesay, Prince Charles, who, because, as a keen Burnsian himself, because he, like the rest of us, was unable to attend a Burns Supper live, asked if we would put out a message from him. You can see that message on our website. It's an absolutely heartwarming message from the Prince of Wales to Burnsians all over the world. There you'll see the coat of arms, which was presented by the Lord Lion at our conference in September, and it's incredibly significant. What Robert Burns asked for, or what he wished for, was the shield, which you see in the middle, with the holly bush and the shepherd's pipe and the shepherd's crook, with on top the woodlark perched upon the sprig of a bay tree. Burns also asked or wished for the two mottos, wood notes wild and better a wee bush than nae bield, which basically translates as a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. All the other things which Burns didn't ask for because he knew he wouldn't get, all those other things were granted by the Lord Lion, and they have tremendous significance heraldically to show the importance of Robert Burns to the nation. On the left, as you look at it, you'll see a collie dog, a border collie. That represents one of the Twa Dugs, one of Burns' most famous poems. On the right, you'll see an old grey mare with scarce a stump. That, of course, refers to Tam O'Shanter's old grey mare, Meg, who lost her tail when it was clocked. She was clocked by the rump by one of the witches that was pursuing them. It's a compartment where they are standing, and that compartment is populated with red roses and mountain daisies, obviously two of the most popular flowers in Burns poetry. But perhaps the most significant thing is the flag, which is being held by the collie on the left. That, of course, is the national flag of Scotland, the St Andrew's Saltire. To be given the national flag of Scotland shows the national importance, the international importance of Robert Burns. And of course, you'll see that the shield is resting on an old brig, which is the old brig of Ayr, and the river which is flowing through it is the Bonnie Doon. So we were delighted and thrilled to be given that by the Lord Lion. And in fact, shameless advertisement from myself. That's me and my family with the Lord Lyon, the Reverend Canon Dr. Joseph John Morrow, at the conference when he had just presented the coat of arms for Robert Burns. We will be coming to Tartan Day. The Robert Burns World Federation will be at Tartan Day with the Lord Lyon, and we will be showing Burns' posthumous grant of arms to the people of North America at Tartan Day. The following year, 2023, we will be having our conference in Calgary in Alberta. So it would be fantastic to see as many interested Scots as possible coming to both of those events.
Alan, thank you. Thank you very, very much, Alan. What an incredible presentation. And on behalf of everyone who's listening, I hope you'll accept our deep appreciation and gratitude. Calgary next year, or 2023, is that when you'll become president of the Federation?
I'll become president in 22 in Dumfries, but I will be taking the AGM and the meeting to hand over to my successor in 2023 in Calgary.
Fantastic. Well, we have just a couple more minutes and before the next session begins, and I have a very kind of selfish thing to ask you.
Sure.
What is your favorite Burns tune? And I so enjoyed you singing Auld Lang Syne earlier that I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to sing your favorite Burns tune. Alan, your voice brings back so many great memories of your time here when you sang at the Union League Club with the Lord Provost of Glasgow, our Burns Supper, our Feast of the Haggis, but most especially here at the Scottish Home, our nursing home that we have just west of the city. The residents so enjoyed it, and I know that many
so
of
did I
remember. Oh, it was a wonderful occasion, and we're grateful to you for doing it. So what song do you enjoy singing the most? What means the most to you?
My parents sang a lot at home. It was just one of those families. They sang all the time at home. And I learned most of my Scottish songs from listening to my parents, uncles, aunts, who would always sing at parties. That was just the way of it in those days. And I'd never actually seen Scottish music written down in music sheets. However, someone came to our house and had a little blue book called the Oxford Scottish Songbook. And in it was a song called O Lay Thy Lift in Mine Lass. And it was a song that I hadn't heard because my parents didn't know it. And my father said to me, do you know that song? And I said, no, I've never heard the song. So I took it into school, and I had a music teacher in school, and I asked the music teacher if he would play it for me. And he did. And in fact, I entered a local festival, a local music festival, singing the song. And I've sung it for years and years. And it's not one of Burns' most famous songs by any manner of means. But I think it's just a beautiful song. O Lay Thy Lift in Mine Lass means give me a hand. Give me a hand. So unaccustomed as I am, Oh, lay thy life in mine, lass, in mine, lass, in mine, lass, and swear on thy white hand, lass, that thou wilt be mine. A slave to love's unbounded sway, he oft hath wrought me mickle way, but now he is my deadly fate. Unless thou'lt be my aid, oh, lay thy life in mine, lass, in mine, lass, in mine, lass, and swear on thy white hand, lass, that thou wilt be my
Incredible, Alan. Beautiful. Everyone I know will have enjoyed hearing about what the work of the Robert Burns World Federation is doing. I encourage everyone to join in to receive the incredible information that I've so enjoyed. Alan, on behalf of everyone at the Scottish North American Community Conference, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for asking me, and we look forward so much to coming over for Tartan Day, and we look forward to carrying on working with the American Scottish Foundation.